In the last episode we programmed the player movement in C#, and now we're going to start creating the game world and add so-called colliders to some elements. This allows you to create walls and other solid objects that the player can't just walk through. We will also look at trigger functions that can trigger an event as soon as we touch an object. Hi, I'm a part-time indie developer and illustrator. I've gained my knowledge through thousands of online tutorials, and now I want to give something back and share these skills with you. If you like these videos, subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos coming up, and if you want to support me, check out my website that contains my published games and a detailed dev blog and much more, or hit me up on Twitter. Okay, now the player is moving, but if we are moving outside the window, the player of course gets lost. So we want to restrict his movement a little bit. Another thing that is important that I didn't mention yet is that if you're in the play mode, don't click in another window, because if I do this, I'm using my keys to walk around in this window, or for example down here, then nothing will happen anymore and you will hear these tuk-tuks sounds. You have to click on the game window while playing, otherwise it won't detect the input correctly. Now we have the museum and we want to add a few walls. So go to your graphics folder, pick a wall and drag it into the museum. And also at the wall, please set the Z value to -1. We can also move it a little bit so that it's not over the player, and we want to achieve that the player is colliding with this wall and can pass through it. We can easily do this without any code. We go to the wall and add a component, and now we search for Collider 2D, Box Collider 2D actually, and I found this by just typing in COLL and I found the Box Collider. And since we added this, a green rectangle appeared on this object, and if we do it again, we can still pass through it. Why? Because colliders, that's the thing that we added, can only collide with other colliders. So we want the player to collide with the wall, so we also select the player and as well add a Box Collider 2D. Here we go. And maybe you don't like what you're seeing, you want the Box Collider to be bigger or smaller, then just go to the component and hit Edit Collider, and now you can grab it on these points and maybe change the size of the Box Collider. You can do the exact same thing here with the offset and size values. And don't forget at the end to again click on the Edit Collider button. So if we now hit Start, and I'm gonna collide with it, perfect. I'm not going through. But we have another problem, which is actually quite funny. If I go into the colliders, you see my player is rotating, and before he has to throw up, we're gonna change this behavior by going onto the player, and in the rigid body component we have the point constraints, and if you click on this arrow symbol, you can freeze the Z rotation, and we're gonna do this. And if we now do the exact same thing, he shouldn't spin around. Perfect. And of course I could now make all the walls around this museum, and then do always the same thing. Take a wall, assign a Box Collider, and then move it to the right position. Check that Z is -1 and so on. But this is not what we want. We want to make it quicker. So we're gonna create under the assets folder by right clicking, create new folder. We're gonna create a Prefabs folder. And what we're gonna do now is we take this wall that is already set up correctly. We can even take the transform to the center, but keep in mind to put Z on -1. We can take this wall and just grab it from the hierarchy down in our Prefabs folder and release it. What now happened, the wall turned blue. This means we created a prefab, a prefabricated asset. If we now take the wall from this prefabs folder and drag it in, you can see that it's already perfectly set up. We have our -1, a box collider added at the right size if you did change anything here, and you can work with this prefabricated asset right away. And you can even delete the original prefab. I'm gonna click on the museum and create a new child by, as I said, clicking on the museum with the right mouse button, create empty, and I call this walls. Take it, grab it, and now I can make this wall on top here. And there are several possibilities, of course, how you could make this wall. We could either go here to the rect tool and grab it and just expand it until it matches our width of our floor. But if you look closely, this might cause a little stretching of the image of the sprite that we have. For now, this doesn't matter. We're gonna work like this, but you can look at other videos where it's explained how you can prevent this from happening. The other possibility, of course, we leave it. And by the way, I just stretched it, and you can see I changed the scale. I can also do this manually here by typing in, for example, 3. And I think 2.5 was perfect for the width, and we can leave it at 1 for the height. Now I'm gonna duplicate this wall by just right clicking and hit duplicate, and I'm gonna move it down so that the player can also cross this, and I'm gonna duplicate it again. And now I want these walls to be created. That's also easy. I can either go up here and choose this rotation tool, grab it at the right axis and just drag it to the right rotation. Or easier, I go here and put 90 degrees in. So this is very accurate, and you see it's slightly too long. Now we're changing the scale of X to be fitting this more or less. .8, and I can duplicate this wall as well, move it to the right, and even rename it, because now it's going to be pretty tough to say which wall is which. Okay, we have only 4, that's okay, but if you have 100 walls, it's going to be hard. So I click on it, I can rename it right here, but I prefer to go up here. Wall top, then we have wall at the bottom, wall left, and wall right. Perfect. All right, now I can collapse this again, and if I now move the parent object, I can move the whole thing. That's also good, especially for later on, and I can always revert it by hitting Ctrl+C. If you didn't do this yet, of course, go to Files and save from time to time, or hit Command-S on your project to not lose any progress that you've done. All right, let's test if our player can move through the walls. No, perfect. We're hitting the walls, we can't go through. So what's gonna happen next? We're gonna create another wall. Let's take our wall prefab and drag it into the walls and create some walls here where the paintings will hang later on, something like this. Yeah, that's nice. Now we can create one more prefab by going under graphics, and I'll collapse these walls, create a new one by right clicking, create empty, and call this paintings. And find our paintings rect that we made. Bam, put it inside. And also here, keep in mind, Z position at -1. I'm just gonna drag it slightly to the left so that we see it, because the camera icon is blocking the view. Exact same thing. Collider 2D. We want to make it slightly bigger. If I press play, you'll see that the player is gonna collide with this, so I can't get closer. I don't want this. I want the player to go through this, but still detect if the player is touching it or not. There are also several ways how we can achieve this. We're going to achieve this through code. And to make this work, we need the painting to be a trigger, which I can assign here. If I just hit the check mark, or hit this box to have a check mark that is trigger. If I now play the game, I can easily pass through it. I can detect if the player is touching this or not. Let's go back to our script and create a new one. I went to the script folders, right-clicked, create a C# script, and I call this painting function and open it. So also here we don't need these. We need another method, and we call it void on trigger, and it already suggests me several things. Enter, and now please select on trigger enter 2D and not on trigger enter. So this is for 3D objects and we're making a 2D game. On trigger enter 2D, and if I double click it, it already auto completes everything. And I'm gonna explain this a little bit further as soon as we have written the next parts of the code, which is we're gonna make a very simple if statement to check what we are colliding with. Collision, this is the collision that happens, dot compare tag, and now you have to be careful again to write player correctly. Then we're gonna do something. And for now, we're just gonna go and debug.log player has entered a trigger, and end of course with a semicolon. So what is this gonna do? It is gonna check if the collision that happens with an object that has the tag player. And if that is true, then we will see this debug line in our console. I'm gonna save this and go in here, and this is the console. So now you will be surprised because we coded everything correctly and nothing happens. Why? Because we're not colliding with anything that has the tag player. Let's check our player, and right below the name you see the tag field. And here we can select something. At the moment it's set as untagged. So let's get in here and select the player. So here it's really important that you write it correctly also in the script. We select player, and now our object player has the tag player, and that's actually what we're checking. We're checking if the collision happens with something that has the tag player. Enter the game mode. We can collide with the walls, and if we collide with the okay, I was very confused why it wasn't working. This is also something that happens very often. I forgot to put my script on the painting, and that is why it wasn't working. So let's take our painting function script and just put it on the painting itself, and let's see what happens now. Great, it's executing. You see here the player has entered the trigger, and this is only visible if you have the speaking bubble selected. That's great, we have our script that seems to be working. So we can detect if the player is entering this field of the painting, but we of course don't want to just trigger this message. We want to do something. We're gonna make our own method, what we did before, of course, on trigger enter. Update, fixed update. These are our predefined methods by Unity. Now we're making our own, and we can call it however we want. For example, display artwork. We end it with these brackets, and then of course with these curly ones again. So everything that display artwork should do must be in between these two brackets. To begin with, we can just take this whole code and paste it in here, and to execute this one, just write it down, display artwork. Then we close it with these brackets, and of course a semicolon. If I save this, it should do exactly the same as before, but this time we're not calling debug.log directly from this if statement. We're doing it from our custom method, display artwork, that we put in here. So let's see if everything works fine. And it does. We're printing it again. Solid work, literally. In the next episode, we will finish the level and add user interface, so-called UI elements to our game screen. And since you've already had some code experience, let's look at the more advanced and extremely useful scriptable objects. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and let's connect each other. See you next time.